1,444 days sober from alcohol today. Welcome to episode number 1 of my podcast, Building Legacy, episode 1, How I Got Sober. And with that, my name's Erik van Conover, and I like to write. These are actually 2 of my journals from my 30s. I have a volume of 3 from my 30s. In my opinion, journals are the number 1 accountability tool for building a legacy. Journals are sacred. Journals are the most direct and impactful way to mark progress and change in your life. I have been keeping journals since 2002. So the better half of my life, I've been keeping journals, and I wanted to read you a passage from 2 years ago. I wrote in bold, "Let people see your soul." And that is exactly what I plan on doing in the episode today. Episode number 1 of Building Legacy is called How I Got Sober. I am starting this podcast as an act of service. If I actually really reflect and think about it, this podcast is so important to me because it's literally the first time in a decade of creating content online that I am making something from conscious intent rather than compulsion. That feels amazing to say because conscious creation comes from a place of abundance and it comes from a place of security, whereas compulsion comes from scarcity. And I had a scarce mindset for far too long in my life. And getting sober was an awakening to that. You know, I'm not even going to sugarcoat it. In the process, we're going to talk about some very deep things like spiritual awakenings, and getting sober for me was a spiritual awakening. And with that said, this is my first time speaking candidly online about addiction and, more importantly, recovery. I don't want to focus on gloom and doom. I want to focus on what I've done to have an alchemy of the soul to better my life. And it's specifically through my sobriety. I've learned some valuable lessons that I feel compelled to share. In getting sober for the first time in literally my adult life in so many years, all I had was the stillness of my mind. Nothing to numb it with, because that's essentially addiction is you are numbing your mind because you do not know how to mitigate your emotions. And when I got sober, I just remember I just sitting with my thoughts, reflecting. In that stillness, I had the ability to reflect on what my life had become. And more importantly, what I had built, but even more importantly, what was I leaving behind? And I went to my YouTube channel and there was maybe 10 videos where I would feel comfortable sharing. And it's literally not until I started doing these old world home tours where I'm happy sharing them because I actually have a deep, deep resonance with history. I went back and I looked at those videos and I said, this is brain rot. This is a guy. I say a guy because it wasn't me. It was a dude in a suit, doing the hand gestures and the magic hands and the whole fake mannerisms. And I watched that and I was like, what the hell are you doing? I specifically almost demoted myself to being a host on the internet, and it chewed away at me. I wrote down here, and to be 100% feeling like absolute shit about my legacy. Disgusted. Crawling in my own skin. And that made me realize I need to do something. I need to actually be a co-creator in my legacy. But then you're probably thinking, Erik, this is 2020. Yeah, it took me 3 years to break from the comfort of making those home tours to actually changing and creating this. Most people in the world today, myself previously included, we don't even give the idea of building a legacy a second thought. That is something so abstract. Those are historical figures. Those are people. Those are mythical people. That's not me. This show is meant to share that we are all called to build a legacy, whatever that looks like. That's like looking at George Washington and saying, oh, that's some historical guy on the dollar bill. We can all have a legacy. This show will be an amplifier of the voices of the strongest modern legacies being crafted today, with the one key message urging us to recognize that you are invited to have a legacy. You're invited to not hide in drugs, consumerism, frivolous sex, addiction, limiting beliefs, all the layers that keep us shackled down. Plain and simple, sometimes we're born into some pretty shitty legacies. Your legacy you inherit from the day you take your first breath on this earth. In today's episode, we will explore the first crucial step to building a legacy: choosing yourself. Legacy is not simply something we leave behind, it is the summation of our daily actions, and it requires daily commitment to build a legacy of impact. The only way society improves is for us to realize that we can actually have some control over building our lives. And for this first episode today, I will be sharing my true story for the very first time on the internet in the most distilled, honest manner, because I think we all reach a point in life where it's just like, what else is there? Specifically, I want to share the lessons that changed my way of thinking and plainly saved my life. Each episode will start with the guest's past legacy, the legacy we inherit, right? So today I'm beginning with myself. Where did my legacy begin? What legacy did I inherit? And essentially for the guest, what legacy were you born into, for better or for worse? And for my own legacy, it's very interesting. I actually, in the past year or so, and since getting sober, found out a lot about my own family history. Before I dive into my family story, again, why you should care, I literally carry around pictures of my ancestors when I have big moments, big meetings. It sounds superstitious, but yeah, in a way it is, because all I will say is energy cannot be created or destroyed. Therefore, it lives on forever. We're made up of energy. Make with that what you'll want. And this brings us to the third section of the podcast. The outline for all the episodes of Building Legacy is the future legacy. These are the main lessons, and essentially what is your vision for the future of not only your own legacy, but more importantly, how your legacy will impact the world. So you can imagine hopefully the types of conversations we can have on here. And again, that's the thing. I'm a conduit to just get these ideas out there. Like, I really just want to use this as a place to build community and to disseminate ideas and information. So again, the vision for the future, my vision for the future with this podcast, we begin today. The future starts right now with this first episode, which, if I'm being transparent again, I was so nervous to make this. It was very nerve-wracking, and I didn't think it would, but because it meant so much, it was. The vision for the future of this podcast is creating consciously with the goal of helping others realize that they can build their own legacy through integrity, purpose, and self-actualization. Whether sobriety plays a part in that or not. In my story, it did, and I imagine in a lot of people's, it probably will. And like I mentioned at the start of this episode, today is day 1,444 without alcohol. Like, I have to say that again to hear that for myself. It's 1,444 days without alcohol, and that feels fucking amazing to say. That's not something where you wallow in on yourself. That's where you puff your chest out and you say, fuck yes, I broke my generational fucking cycle of trauma. Oh man. What else? My family story began in 1579 in the Netherlands with a man named Wolfert Gerties van Kovenhoven. Yeah, that's quite the mouthful. Like, you're seeing this right now on the screen. If you're watching this, if you're listening, I will describe this in great detail. It goes back to the 1400s, and it's Ancestry.com premium. So I know it's not just like BSing me. Pretty wild. So that's one of the main reasons why I encourage you and implore you to literally like look into your history. The originator of my family, he worked with the Dutch West India Company. Like, this guy sailed across the fucking ocean in a wooden ship to a place where no one was living. Like, that alone, like, why does your legacy matter? I had no idea. I had no idea that my family started off that far back. And like, I kind of knew about it. So I have a family crest. When I was a kid, I thought it was like fake or something. I was like, oh, that's just like a cool painting my grandma's neighbor made, but it's like an actual legit crest because it was crossed with all the Ancestry.com users who have, you know, my heritage. Because here's the crazy thing. Let me break this down in a big way. So why do your ancestors matter? The importance of this. So this guy, Wolfert Gerties van Kovenhoven, is my 12th great grandfather. That's 12 generations. That's 4,094 humans over 400 years lived so I can live. And for me to do what? Order food on Seamless? Slam a bottle of vodka to my face because I couldn't deal with my emotions? When this dude got in a wooden ship, literally risked his life to sail across the Atlantic Ocean, and I'm gonna have a meltdown because of something going wrong in my life and I can't handle it, so I fucking smash vodka. Like that's absurd. And I hope I'm getting very pumped up on this because it's like, it's a nice reminder for me to be like, yeah, hold yourself accountable to a high standard. People lived for you to breathe the air you're breathing right now. Man, you might notice I added Van back to my name. This is so crazy. This is the final thing in my my essential transformation and all this to change my name. I have been sitting on the name change papers for about like 3 months. And my business coach, Lawrence, has urged me. And it's so weird because even that, I have so much fear against that. It's such a small thing. But for me, changing my name back to Van Conover, I'm not doing Van Covenhoven because essentially Van Covenhoven means from Covenhoven in the Netherlands. Van means from. Covenhoven became Conover. It was Van Conover. Then the Van was dropped. Now it's just Conover. And even like going back to like kind of knowing I had a family history, there's a town in South Jersey called Conover Town. Granted, it's like the armpit of South Jersey. Like it's literally just like halfway houses and like landfills. It's still kind of crazy. And I was like, well, that's not normal. That's my last name. But yeah, dig into your family history, your past legacy. It's important. I have bolded here. Knowing your ancestry is about honoring your present self by being informed about the struggles your ancestors went through. So like, again, pay homage to your family. I have the pictures for a reason. I knew I had them for more than just that. But yeah, your family went through unimaginable struggles. That's my dad's side, my dad's legacy, that legacy. On my mom's side, World War II really interrupted me even finding out what the legacy was. So I went on Ancestry.com and I can only trace it back 2 greats, I believe. So both my grandparents were, they were in concentration camps. It's crazy, man. I didn't think this would be so difficult because it's the thing also is like I went back to school. I mentioned that, or maybe I didn't, but I went back to school and it really just taught me how to be a human again. And being a human is actually feeling the shit you feel and letting it pass through you. So on my mom's side, the Holocaust, both my grandparents were in concentration camps. I have to say this as well. They were not killed because they both had hard skills. My grandfather was a mechanic on airplanes and my grandmother was a seamstress. So he came over to America, and back then I guess they had like essentially what was like a mail order bride. Like people were just getting sponsored to come to America, and he literally chose her out of a magazine, sponsored her to come. She landed in Ellis Island, then went to South Jersey, where I'm from. To think that my grandparents were married by my grandfather picking her out of a magazine. We're going to talk about generational trauma in this episode. And just right there, like they lived through unimaginable things that I could never comprehend. So once again, me getting upset about some trivial thing for my life happening and then wanting to drink because of it is absurd. And I could only see that with the clarity of being sober. So again, why does legacy matter? Because it informs who you are now. Because you can actually have some gauge of what the people went through for you to be born. And that's actually something I want to do in this podcast is I want the guests to come here prepared. I want my guests to come here research, like having their family history research, stuff like that. But moving on to my own, legacy, I'm from a town called Absecon, New Jersey. It's quite interesting because a lot of people who watch these episodes, especially like given how I am dressed, people think I'm from like, the Upper West Side or like, Tribeca. I'm from a town called Absecon, New Jersey, population right around 8,000. The median per capita income is only $41,000 per year, which is very similar to the rest of America. That's my legacy. That's where I was born into. And then you're probably thinking to yourself, oh, well, you have this crazy family heritage. But it's interesting because that main guy, Wolfert Gaertjes van Covenhoven, he is famous in history because he is the first recorded deed in American history for Flatbush. It's 3,000 acres of land. It's in the Library of Congress. It's pretty crazy. It's on like deerskin. But you're probably thinking, okay, this guy owned 3,000 acres of land in Brooklyn. Why? What happened? It's like, what do you think happened? What's the title of this episode? How I Got Sober. Alcoholism can run through a family, and if a family has resources, that could be the undoing of it. So, by the time it got to me, 12 generations down, I'm from, a very middle-class family in Absecon, New Jersey. I'm not, owning 3,000 acres in Flatbush. So yeah, I'm from Absecon, New Jersey. I was born into a very middle-class family, hard workers. I have a history of alcoholism on both sides of my family. But the thing is, alcoholism, I've realized, is a side effect of trauma. Like plain and simple, addiction is a side effect of trauma. It's crazy. I'm so happy I made this outline. So I have early life in Absecon, and then dealing with tough events in life, you do it with many ways. You do it with humor, you do it with blocking. But all I have written is I have ages 6 to 9 years, and I have trauma. And I'm going to sit up and fucking say this because it's not something to wallow in on. And I'm going to take a line from Will Smith because I heard him say this with trauma, especially if you're a kid. It's not your fault, but it is damn sure your responsibility, in the words of Will Smith, to do something about it. And what does that mean? That means get sober. That means work on yourself. If you have behavior patterns that are hurting other people, look at yourself and figure out, why do you keep doing that? So if your life is going on a loop and you're repeating the same behavior, it's for a reason. It's most likely something very heavy happened to you that you haven't dealt with. And when you're really young, that can get kind of buried down there. So that's all I'm going to say about that. The reason I sat and puffed my chest out was because you can have alchemy of your emotions. You can turn wallowing into courage. It's either love or hate in life, and love and hate are the same emotions, just the opposite directions. So you turn something like that feeling of, thinking back on something horrible that happened to you. And I can use that. That happened to me. I went through that. I can share this. My parents got divorced when I was very young, along with other things that were happening. And another theme and lesson in my life is guardians. Guardians are a theme for my life story, and I'm going to touch on some topics a bit later, such as suicide. It's realizing you're not alone. So essentially, my grandmothers were there in a time during my life when very, very traumatic things were happening to me, and I hate trauma dumping. It's never a cool thing to trauma dump. So they were the people that were the light in my life, and I'll focus on that. They were the light, and ironically, again, just going back to synchronicities and tying into my sobriety story, my grandmother was that person who was there for me more than my parents. And it's not a coincidence I got sober on her birthday. This episode is going to get a little weird. I had contact with her. I'll say that. I'll say that, and we'll elaborate more as we go on. Your guardians are your lifelines, and you're never alone. I'm highlighting my early life because that is the root of the problem. So we're going to jump to high school now. High school, college. I wrote drinking began. So I have literally written down, when did I realize it was a problem? Here's the thing. So I was a swimmer. I started swimming at age 12, and it was the first outlet where I really could put my anger into something from just my life and experiences. And with swimming, I got pretty quick, and I was so obsessed where I wouldn't drink because I was afraid it would deter my swimming. Another reason why I didn't drink is because I saw my own parents and family members struggle with alcoholism. My goal was to get out of my hometown. My hometown, it's a beautiful place, but it has, it's kind of tough because my family will be watching this, but my hometown can have limiting beliefs and it can kind of hold you. So that was my goal. I was like, okay, I'm going to get a swimming scholarship, get out of here. That didn't happen. I got pretty quick, but not quick enough. And then I pulled a 2K on a rowing machine, if you know what that is. And I got a college rowing scholarship to a pretty good school called Northeastern, just from doing a 2K. So the swimming work actually did pay off, and I got out of my hometown. And after that, after the swimming dreams faded, that was kind of like, oh, well, states are done. I did what I could do. I had a buddy who lived on the bay in Ventnor. Ventnor is a very wealthy town on the coast of Absecon. Absecon's on the marshes. I had a buddy who lived in Ventnor, huge house. Dad also went to Northeastern, had jet skis, always had parties there. There's all these people from other schools there. I have my first sip of alcohol, and it burns in such a sensation where I'm like, wow. I feel like Superman because I was very shy growing up. Believe it or not, I was very shy. All of high school, I was literally like that weird kid that didn't talk. I was like 6'3", 140 pounds, pimples, and just shy and a swimmer. I was just a weird kid. And then I hit puberty and kind of grew into my body. And that still inner view of myself was there, that kind of shy. I would slouch. I would literally slouch because I hated being so tall. Man, it's crazy. That first night I drank, I blacked out. And every other time after that, almost that summer, I'd black out. That became the goal of it. And that was the norm. Granted, I'm going to age myself here a little bit, but I graduated high school in 2008. Times are very different now. People, I think, are much more aware of holistic and that alcohol is literally spirits. But yeah, drinking, it made me feel like the man. And that summer was the summer when I went into college. And I was also a lifeguard down in Atlantic City. I mentioned I was a fast swimmer. So I was an ocean lifeguard in Atlantic City, and we'd have parties all summer long. And It was just shoved in my face every direction from everyone. And now that it was like an ongoing joke on the beach patrol because I was like one of the only sober lifeguards in South Jersey. And then finally it was the summer that, man, Erik's going to get shit faced. Yeah, he won't do it. And I felt like the man because I had always felt a bit of inadequacy, which now I know the reasons why, obviously. I'm just going to go back to childhood. I'll also just say childhood. And from there, I have college more and more. I wrote down pressure and mob mentality from the rowing team. I was on a rowing team, which was like a fraternity, which, man, I wish, back to mentors, I wish I had a strong male mentor in my college years. It would have saved me so much time of just wasting my life drinking. That's why we're making this. I have in bolts, and I laugh because it's a deflection thing. I have story of orientation with my dad. Yeah, I want to highlight it with some personal stories. So orientation at Northeastern. It's late summer. I didn't really even want to go to Northeastern because I just knew it was my ticket out, and I was there with my dad. I was excited. My dad's there. We drove up from South Jersey. And there's the quad and there's a fountain. And my dad said, okay, go off and do what you're going to do. Go walk around. I'll meet you here at 5:00 for dinner. We're going to meet up and go, I think we're going to go to Faneuil Hall and grab dinner. And I said, okay. And I met up with these guys on the baseball team who were already there for training. And sure enough, we go back to the dorms and there's a big old fucking thing of Smirnoff. It's like 2 p.m. I said, let's go. I'm the man. I can, let's fucking go. Drink until about 6:00, walk back to the quad. Saw my dad just sitting there waiting. Drinking makes it so you don't show up in your life, therefore not showing up in other people's life. And the point of that story is that my dad was sitting there waiting while I was just getting fucking drunk. He probably won't even remember that story. A big thing also with sobriety is not beating yourself up for the past and really accepting the things that you've done and, in a sense, paying it forward by living courageously and truthfully. Beating yourself up over the stories doesn't do anything, but it's important to highlight occasionally stories. And the whole point is that I let my dad down. He was pumped. His son was going to this college and oh man, and I just let him there, let him wait there. Yeah, and this continues on to college. I was undeclared almost all of college. And told I couldn't do things because I didn't have a direction. That's a big thing. College, especially nowadays. I mean, obviously people don't even really go to college anymore. In college, I loved film from an early age. That's why I started my YouTube channel. But no one told me, hey, you should probably take some film study classes or editing classes. So with that, I was about to say college was a waste of time, but college was just a lot of hard lessons. And in college, again, I mentioned I wanted to do something in film. I ended up majoring, ironically, in public advocacy and rhetoric, which is speech giving. If you wanted to be a politician, you'd go, you could study that, then go to law school. So the takeaway from the college and the high school years, we're not even addressing my drinking yet, was that do not let fear and judgment stop you from doing things, because I always wanted to work in film. And again, it wasn't seen as a thing back then because social media didn't even exist. YouTube just came out in 2005. I had a college professor sit me down and tell me YouTube was like a bowl of popcorn and just snackable content. And then by 2008, people were earning, the Shay Carls of the world, these early YouTubers. So even from then, I remember I had an idea to start a channel. Like my junior year, my teacher's like, nah, it's a fad. It'll pass. It was because of fear. And the judgment of that teacher is telling me no. That's why mentorship is so important, because all it takes is one person to say, yeah, you know what? Maybe that could work. So that's the biggest takeaway from college. So moving to New York, this is where most of you who know me from the internet, this is where my story starts. So why NYC post Northeastern? So like I mentioned, I wanted to work in film. I didn't know if that was in front of the camera, behind the camera, somewhere in production. So I moved to New York because it was like, all right, Los Angeles or New York. I love the East Coast. I moved to New York. I had my in was I signed with a modeling agency of all just shallow, stupid things. And I thought that was my meal ticket. And I get here and a month into it, they drop me and they're like, good luck. And I was living up on 125th and Malcolm X with 6 other dudes. It's interesting. I moved to New York 2013. I didn't start the channel till 2015. So those first 2 years, I'll explain to you a bit about what I was doing. Again, I moved here because I wanted to work in film. especially acting. I had this interest in acting for some reason, again, because I had so many emotions, but I had no idea how to process them. And I knew it wasn't a normal thing, the extremes of which my temperament could go, especially towards anger, because anger is never just anger. Under anger is usually deep, deep sadness. So with that, I was like, okay, what's this? I wanted to pull on this. And post Northeastern, even with my athletic scholarship, had a ton of student loan debt. And I wanted to really go study theater. I always loved theater. I always loved the idea of something being live and you couldn't recreate it. Even like this podcast, like this is just stream of thought. So I'm looking at theater schools and they're all super expensive. With that, school is out of the option, actually like paying to go study at a conservatory. And then again, another synchronicity. I had a chance meeting. I met a pretty famous female actress who was a member of the Actors Studio. And I mentioned the Actors Studio at the start of this podcast. I actually just did a play with members of the studio, which is very full circle. It's pretty wild when the world kind of leaves breadcrumbs. But I interned at this Actors Studio, unpaid, taking out the trash, while at the same time working every single job you could imagine in New York City. I have just a few written down here. So it started with Ford Models. Then I got a job working in corporate at Abercrombie and Fitch. And I was there for, I kid you not, a month and a half. And the culture at that company back then, it was just everyone's shit-faced, everyone's hooking up. And I'm like, I can't do this. If this is my life for the next 5 years, fuck that. And I just remember I was sitting on, there's a church on Fifth Avenue, just sit my lunch and eat there. That was the highlight of my day, sitting on this church, looking at the architecture, and then having to go back into this dark dungeon with these people who are literally drinking on the job. Me, an alcoholic, drinking on the job. Of course. What do you think I'm going to do? So I quit there. And then after that, just odd jobs. I was a fitness instructor once. I worked catering way too many times. Talk about being humbled and just treated like nothing. Cater in New York. When you move to New York, get a job at like 9/11 catering or something and cater an event and really internalize how people treat you. And through all these odd jobs, I ended up at the Gort Hotel in the meatpacking district, where I was, very ironically, again, a lifeguard, this time at a pool, not in the ocean. So I'm sitting at the top of the Gort Hotel. It's 2014. And it was honestly a dream job for like someone who had a side hustle, because it was an outdoor pool and it was wintertime. So no one would use it. So I'd literally just sit there and kind of do whatever I wanted. But anyway, I have a college degree from Northeastern, which is actually like a solid school, making $14 an hour to sit and lifeguard. And here I had friends who, through the co-op program, were making like $80K a year. Again, just me feeling like, what the fuck am I doing with my life? But having this weird feeling that like, okay, this feels right. This direction feels good. Let me go this way. Again, still operating in complete bliss of the fact that I was just handicapped. I was going through life like this, literally like that. Maybe an eye shut, maybe my ears shut some days. That's what it was like. So anyway, I'm at this hotel and I had a lot of time to think. And with that, I found a book by a guy named Gary Vaynerchuk. Gary V, if you're actually watching this, I've never met you, but thank you. He had a book called Crush It, which was all about building a personal brand. And here I am working at this hotel with a college degree, and my student loan debt was about to freaking just kick in. So I'm kind of in panic mode, and I read this book. I'm like, okay, I want to start a personal brand. And I just back-end engineered it. I'm like, what do I like? What can I offer to the world? Where do these things meet? And from there, Gary advised people start blogs. Like back then, a blog was a thing, like a written blog. And like I mentioned, I love to write. So I started a blog. I was so afraid of being on camera when I first started YouTube. I haven't even told you this. I was so petrified, and I just did it because I'm like, well, I know what this life looks like if I just sit at this hotel. And, you know, I saw people at the hotel who were like 40 years old, actors, artists, and they were still there. I'm like, that's not gonna be me. So I read this book and I pulled out it was like an iPhone 7S, and I just start filming YouTube videos on my iPhone. This is actually the point in my story where the worlds kind of merged, the YouTube and the alcoholism. So when I first moved to New York, obviously I was too broke to even afford to drink. So it would be like free events, you know, a friend who's paying for something to go out. But it's interesting because my alcoholism wasn't something that was an everyday thing. It wasn't, oh, I need to drink every day. It was, life gets tough. That's an outlet to turn to. Oh man, I'm in a string of days of life being tough. Okay, well, I drank on this. Oh, wait a day. No, okay, I'll drink. Oh, it was a hard day. I'll drink today too. Oh shit. And then that's how that would happen. Like, I don't like even the taste of it, really. Like, I never really liked to drink as like a fun thing. For me, it was always a tool to numb, and just seeing in my own life, my family, people doing that, unfortunately. and seeing that it was a tool to numb rather than like, oh, this is something you can actually enjoy and like be a normal person. So it's interestingly enough, the whole point of that is when I started YouTube, I was so focused on success on YouTube where I didn't really drink. I didn't want to talk about YouTube too much, but I think it's very relative to the story. So in the beginning, early days, like I started in 2014. YouTube wasn't even, it was people were actually just making things because they wanted to make things. There was no real business behind it, which I think now just kind of bastardized the whole thing where people just make things to go viral. So back in those early days of YouTube, it was purely to make things because I actually wanted to learn how to edit and make videos. And in those beginning days, I was working at the Gansevoort. So I'd wake up at like 5:30, take the 6 train down to the L train and sit at the top of the Gansevoort Hotel. And then eventually I'd bring my computer and start editing on iMovie, filming these vlogs. So I'd sit at the hotel and then I would film a vlog after my day from about like 2 p.m. till about 6 p.m. Oh, actually, this is about to get kind of deep. So in the early days, I would highlight my life and what it was like living in the city, but it was such a highlight reel. And that is very unhealthy for your mind because it separates you from your true self when you start building and constructing a persona, because inherently it becomes a TV show. Especially I started doing daily vlogs because it was the best way I could learn how to edit. I really enjoyed building a community in the early days, and that's something I lost. I lost that when I went to the home tours, and that's what I want to build with this. Like if 5,000 people watch this or 5 million, I want to build a community of people who actually like want to make the world a better place. And I had that with the early days. Whenever I had a strong goal, and this will tie into a bit of the esoteric principles and a bit of the spiritual things later in the episode, I would always, in periods of times where I'd set big goals, I would never drink. Never. I would be like, oh, this is so important to me. I can have a very obsessive personality with when I focus on like a goal or something. So I didn't, again, think it was a problem because it was kind of, I went from kind of being this guy in college, like on a sports team, to moving to New York. Student loans kicked in. The first year, I was actually talking to Milan, my producer. I made like $23,000 the first year. Second year, like 18, just like scraps. And back in 2014, you could still do that. You could still do that in New York. No way today. No freaking way today. Those early years were so raw because I don't have a lot. I noticed the things that really make me feel a certain way. So those early years were really pivotal in just me grounding myself in the city. The pull of the city, like a question, especially friends ask me, is like, why didn't you leave? I ate shit here for a lot of years and I never left because it has this pull. Even in this space now, we are in such a historical place, and New York City has that. It has the depth that I always craved in my life. The first goal initially was to just be a full-time YouTuber, quit the job at the hotel. I wasn't making enough to even cover my cost of living. And then from there, it was just be a full-time YouTuber. And again, it's interesting. In the beginning of my life, reflecting back, very shallow goals, because it's Maslow's hierarchy of needs. The bottom is like survival, shelter, food, sex, all that. And the top is self-actualization. That was always my goal. Like, what is the best version of myself? But in the beginning years, you're just getting by. Those basic food, shelter, all that. I'm good. So I started YouTube 2015. By 2017, about 2018, it took 3 years to get to 300,000 subscribers making vlogs. I'd say content that I had more passion for, definitely. Slower growth. I don't really want to talk too much about getting into the home tours, but I started doing the home tours. I was a first mover, and the first tour I posted got like 5 million views. And for me back then in 2018 on YouTube, that was huge. And again, knowing where I'm from, knowing the context of my life story now, of course I ran with it. I saw this opportunity. I could pay off my student loans. I would steal food from the Gansevoort. Sorry, Gansevoort, if you're watching this. I literally would steal cleaning supplies. I'd steal food. That's what it was. But the pull of New York kept me here. And then I make these home tours. I'm like, oh man, this is it. This is it. I can build a business. And this is, I'm going to bring this up because this is actually where I have to reference very important key takeaways again. With all that success, I saw the home tours were taking off, and I said, oh man, I could hit 1 million subscribers. And that became my North Star. And I said, I'm not going to drink until I hit 1 million subscribers. I'm not going to do it. And to segue into this 1 million subscribers and all these super external goals, these material goals, you become so good at lying to yourself and the world around you when you are operating under the control of alcohol. That's what it is. It honestly does. It possesses people and it takes them and makes them do and say things that they would never do. And a trait that you learn is how to lie like a mastermind. Like when all this was happening, you watching my videos, you just saw the home tours. You saw this guy. giving you a very surface level, kind of superficial look, when under the surface, it was hell. It was chaos erupting. And this is actually a point that a good friend of mine just reminded me, who actually has 10 years. He was saying that in the process of him realizing he needed to get sober, it was because of how well he realized he was lying to himself, and more importantly, the people in his life and his family. And here's the thing, the goal of 1 million subscribers is a shallow, shallow goal. At the time, it was my end all be all, but it's a shallow goal. For context, I'll never forget this. When I was in conservatory, in my acting conservatory, and I hit 2 million subscribers. And I was working on this big scene I couldn't hit. It was a scene from a Tennessee Williams play, actually. When I finally hit it, it was more meaningful to me than hitting 1 million subscribers on YouTube. Doing a scene in a little fucking room in Brooklyn that no one's gonna see, but that was the biggest change in my life, was doing things for the external versus doing things for me. 1 million subscribers, I thought it was for me, external. Look at me, look at these, external. And it's only now that like the sobriety enables me to say this, which a lot of you watching are probably like, oh, I never knew that this was here. So again, to break that down, to recap, it took me 3 years to go from 0 to 300,000 subscribers on this YouTube channel. And then within a year, from 300,000 to 1 million by doing the home tours, but in the process, severing myself from who I actually was. I'm a very like bohemian dude. Even the fact I'm wearing a suit now, I only wanted to do that because that's who you know me as. And I also want this to be a place of really high level conversations, like sobriety. Sobriety is not like let's throw on our sweats and jump on a couch and do a podcast. If you'll notice, I have like crystals on my set. I bet you wouldn't think that I was into crystals or meditation or things that we're going to talk about in this episode. So that year I hit 1 million subscribers. Do you know how I celebrated? Take a wild guess. How I celebrated hitting 1 million subscribers. I was in South Korea and I had a glass of wine. So let me have a glass of wine. I'll celebrate. Drank the whole bottle. Drank another bottle. Drank a third bottle. But no, I don't have a problem. Sobriety is founded upon the ability to be utterly truthful with yourself. Period. I hit 1 million subscribers. I am so emboldened in a false sense of, okay, I want to go all in. I'm going to get my real estate license, because up until then I was just marketing these homes. And I'm like, let me get my license. Let me actually sell these homes. Yeah, the goal, more money. Let me sell them. And all I'm going to say, I will read from this. I have pandemic, war stories. Every alcoholic has their war stories. Rather than focusing on the war stories, I've found it's most helpful to focus on what worked. But first, I do have to, in a way, qualify how I did hit rock bottom. And that term's so cliche because it's not rock bottom. Rock bottom is the most beautiful place you can be, because you have to, just like I said, you sit with your thoughts and then you can actually find the truth. So essentially, I'm going to sum it up like this. I hit the 1 million subscribers, felt unstoppable, all in on home tours, all in on being an agent. I was on such an incorrect life path, on such a materialistic path. Literally, my ego, and I can say it now, my ego was so exploded. And that's a big thing in this world, is the material world. Ego and the material world, they're best buds. They fucking love each other. You're going to make millions of dollars, your ego is going to love you. This is something that I've gained quite a bit of knowledge around, the Hermetic principles since getting sober. And one of the biggest laws in the Hermetic principles is the law of polarity, the law of balance, the law of karma. So on the surface level, while you all were watching me walk through these homes, many of you thought I was able to afford these $20 million places. You know, I had surface level success. I'm like posting pictures with this YouTube plaque, all this financial success. The only way I could describe my internal state was I was spiritually I can't even say it. I was spiritually bankrupt. And what does that mean? That means I was so severed from my sense of spirit, so disgustingly rooted in the physical world, where my internal state was directly manifesting my external world. And I was so oblivious to it. I'm just looking around. Oh, why is this happening? Why me? It's because I don't even know. This is where it gets heavy, man. This is where I'm glad I have this, because this brings us to the NDE. And I'm going to tell this. Oh, I'm going to feel it as much as I want to feel it, but it's more important to get the lessons from it. So pandemic started, drinking got worse until December 8th, 2020. I'm walking through Little Italy. I just got done a shoot out in the Hamptons. And a few times before this point, I had these thoughts come in my head, and a thought's a powerful thing. A thought can start this, or a thought can lead your mind to turn on itself and do some harmful things to yourself. So I'm walking through Little Italy, get back from this shoot. I had already made up my mind. I'm looking at couples sitting, smiling, and laughing and eating. Christmas lights are up. I don't even have a color gray. Yeah, here we go. Gray. Everything was gray. Everything. I'm like, oh, I'm going to get some food. Couldn't taste shit. I was at such a place where I didn't know what to do. The food had lost flavor. Life lost color. My family members I thought were my enemies. I backed myself into such a corner where I just consciously decided to drink myself to death. I walked into the liquor store in Little Italy and I got a handle of Smirnoff and I walked. I don't know. Why? Okay, I'm just going to. This is tough for me. This is tough to say this. Damn, because even thinking back now, a big part of the story, it's December 8th and it's like 15 degrees out. And I purposely didn't bring a coat. I purposely got the bottle. This is very important. This is a very important point to this story. I walk into the liquor store. I would have given any amount of money to that guy who sold me the handle. He saw it in my eyes. He knew what I was going to do. He knew I'd go back to a room somewhere or go to a park and fucking drink that whole thing. And he knew, and it was almost as if I could read his mind and he could read my mind. Man, if he would have just said something like, yo, not a good idea, bud. Maybe go for a wine or something. Just sold it to me. Oh, okay, I'm going to refer back to the paper because I have this for a reason. And that's why the main lesson of this part of the story is you need to check in on people, even if they are strangers. You know when someone is at that point, because it's not a point of sadness. It's not a point of anger. It's just hopelessness. And hopelessness is best described by the color gray. Food doesn't taste like anything. Colors are, it's bland. Nothing means anything. And without meaning, life has no purpose. So the lesson is you need to check on people. I walk over to Canal Street and Erik, ironically, where then I rented an apartment for 4 years after. So I walk over to Canal and Erik Street. There's some chess tables and I sit at them and again, no coat. I had like a little thermal on. I just start drinking. I remember chugging where I was like, oh, I wonder how much I could drink in one chug. Oh, I wonder how fast I could finish this. I wonder how fast I could just shut my brain off. I wonder how fast I can just make this kind of like this numb away. And this is where we get a bit interesting on the podcast and we go to a bit of the spiritual and esoteric, which is my favorite part. I used to think this part wasn't even real up until recently. So I drank myself to this point where essentially, I saw myself over myself. It sounds so cliche saying, but you could literally Google NDE, all similar things. I saw a flash. I heard a whoosh, almost like the sound of a plane going over your head, and it slowly gets fainter and fainter. And the more it gets faint, the higher you go. And I'm looking over myself, and it was like a pulsing light, and it was Loretta. This picture is from 1946. She was born in 23, so she was a very young woman there, and it was her, but she was not old. She was young, and she was saying, go to sleep. Go to sleep. It's okay. It's okay if you go to sleep. And I remember thinking that. It was just like a warm blanket. Like someone put a warm blanket over me. I'm like, okay. And I felt my body vibrating like very fast. And whether it's shaking or it was vibrating. And I remember thinking, I'm like, oh, what? I thought of my dad. I thought of my mom. And it was, I'm just going to fucking tell. I'm not going to sugarcoat. You see your whole life literally pass before your eyes. It was if I saw the lessons of my life up to that point, and not in a bad way, but very detached. Like, oh, these were areas where you could have done more or less. Almost like a review of my soul, essentially. And also from researching this, I found that this is a very common thing where you almost like replay your life and in a sense where to learn from it. And I just remember thinking, oh, my parents, what about this? What about that? And she's like, well, if you do decide to wake up, it's going to be extremely hard. I remember thinking, what do you mean hard? Like, it's been fucking hard. This is where it gets weird. I wake up to my dad FaceTiming me. My mom has premonitions, and my babushka, Galina, who's in this picture, also had premonitions, and she woke up and was like, I had a dream. Erik said you had to come or something. And I wasn't answering my phone, and my mom literally told my dad at 3 a.m. to drive up to New York City, and it's a 2-hour drive. So he got to me right at around 5:30 in the morning, and I truly believe if no one found me in that hotel, I probably would have choked on my own vomit. I probably would have had brain damage. I mean, I don't know. I don't know. And I've said this to my parents before, but there's a reality where, yeah, I died and they had to have a funeral for their YouTube son and they would have passed, but it would have ruined my family's life. And that's another huge takeaway is the selfishness of drinking. When you drink to excess, it is the most selfish thing because it's not you that obviously you're hurting yourself, but the people around you. But yeah, that's how my dad got to the Arlo is my mom had a premonition and called him and told him to drive up. My dad answers the phone. He's like, oh, I like you called me and you hung up. What's up? And I told him what had happened. I told him. And at this point, I'm like, not even there. I'm like in the ether. I'm like kind of in the spiritual, kind of in the physical. I'm in the ether. That's what I'd call it. My dad's like, okay, we got to get you to your apartment. I'm like, I need to go to a hotel. And I go to a hotel and I'm on Canal and Barrack. And the closest hotel was the Arlo, which is like literally a block away. It took me like 30 minutes to walk there. And my dad's on the phone with me. I walk in and I still had I'm clutching to this handle like it's my fucking heart, my lifeline. And I'm gonna walk in. He's like, I tried to walk into the hotel with the handle, so I threw it. I remember that because I remember the noise. I wake up. I remember I left my door open. I wake up. Because I couldn't breathe because I was on my back and I was choking on my own vomit. And I had smacked my head on the corner table and I had blood everywhere. And my dad's there. I'm like, even then I'm trying to brush off. I'm like, oh, what are you doing here? And he sees me. And now think back to the story in the quad, the freshman quad. My dad's sitting there. And obviously I had to tell him what happened, why I bailed on him that one night. And my dad leaves and he comes back and he gets me a breakfast sandwich. I'm like, what are you doing? I don't want to eat right now. And of course he got it for me because it was at the point where I probably should have went and got my stomach pumped, but he got me that sandwich and a Gatorade, and in the moment, I'd never felt such shame in my life. I'm clinging to this toilet like it is the hand of God as I'm retching, and I see my dad standing against the wall, looking down at me, and it was like the sadness and shame was radiating, and I told myself, I'm like, I'm never going to feel like this again. I'm never going to let down someone like this again. I'm never going to let myself down like this again. I'm never going to feel like this again. On December 9th, 2020, that was my first day sober. And that's where everything began. Now I got to actually get this up again. Okay. Essentially, since getting sober, I have been asking questions to my subconscious, which this is a very important topic in this podcast and this episode is working with plant medicines and the healing effects on the soul that I have experienced working with plant medicines. It's been nothing short of profound. It's the reason why I'm doing this podcast. My experiences, they healed me. The thing is, we're always a work in progress. Like, I'm not here preaching. I'm not here. I still have my flaws and my things I am working on. but plant medicine made me look into my subconscious and really clearly see how unhappy I was with my current legacy, that I had an NDE, a near-death experience, on the corner of Canal Street and Varick Street. Yeah, the takeaways from all this: drinking is not the problem. It's a side effect of a much rooted, deeper trauma. If you have someone in your life who is typically quick to anger, who turns to addiction, they most likely have something much deeper going on. It's very hard to point someone in the right direction, but there are ways to slightly nudge someone and ask them how they're doing. But it's only you that can really then go in and do the inner work. The next point: operating in an amazing illusion, surface success, internal destruction. Again, check up on people, even people who look like they're crushing it, especially those people. Yeah, on surface, I had made it, and internally, I was clinging to the toilet of the Arlo Hotel covered in blood and vomit. So getting sober is the first step. Once you're sober, the real work begins. So the people I want on this podcast are people who have a life where they start in one place and they have a radical awakening and then totally turn it around. So this section, again, the present legacy, is all about moving forward. I find this anonymous support group, and I go there. And again, I'm still reeling from the events of what had just happened. And I'm shocked to see people laughing and having fun in community. I'm thinking, oh, this is a meeting where everyone's talking about their addiction. What is this? And people are coming up and introducing themselves, just the most friendly environment. I was shocked. And I get up there for the first time, and it was a pretty large group because this is peak pandemic. In December, the line was around the block. And I get up there, and I don't even know why I did. I felt so much shame because, what just happened. And I shared everything. I shared it in even more detail than I just shared here. Because again, I said war stories are important, but I don't like to dwell on them. And I shared everything. And in that moment, that was me, literally that first step of reclaiming who I was. The real me, not this facade of this guy touring these homes. And that was the very empowering moment. That first meeting there was no judgment, and it taught me to not judge myself. And that specific group is founded 100% on accountability. You cannot get sober if you're not accountable and telling yourself the truth. You cannot. And the beauty of that is then that truthful nugget in your sobriety, because it's so heavy, it almost bleeds into all other aspects of your life. And at the end of the day, it's you putting your head on the pillow in your mind and looking back and being happy or not with the actions of the day. So the honesty goes into all other aspects. And those first 90 days, I was fragile. I was fragile telling the story. And this is 4 years later, having a handle on it. And that's the first lesson, the present, one day at a time. So the first 90 days of being sober, these are the counting days. Literally, again, it's day 1,444. I still count days because I don't want to rest on my laurels. I found the most helpful tools in my sobriety are the most simple tools. The biggest thing is you get sober and you think your life's going to be amazing, but no, you have to deal with the fallout of all the shitty choices you made while you were still doing your drinking. But the thing is, now you have the clarity to actually sit with your thoughts. And what that does is that builds character and makes mental fortitude, because you can't cheat yourself out of feeling what you're going to feel. So those first habits, number one, cold water. Cold water is your best friend. Comfort is a great thing in life, but you need to have your body feel the extremes. So cold water, specifically, Wim Hof breathing, the power of breath work is something still that I feel like we're not fully tapped into. And even from my research, it seems like the ancients were. So breathing, and I'm talking, if you've ever done Wim Hof, you can go and look all this stuff up. I was getting to the point where I'd hold my breath for 4 minutes. Literally a 4-minute breath hold. My hands would tingle, crazy. Because it was the one thing that would calm my mind. Again, it's all about the internal. It's the internal influencing the external actions. The next one, fitness, but fitness to feel good and not look good. I've done some very public fitness challenges that I look back and to be honest, I cringe because the goal of them was only external. Now, fitness is solely for this and this. It is to feel good about myself so I can show up the best in my life and make other people feel good. That's literally it. It's not obsessing to build on and pack on muscle. And I think a lot of this stuff is going to change in the next few years where people are like pushing that like facade away. But fitness, like working out, I'm talking like doing cardio more than weights. And for a guy like, oh, let's lift weights. No, cardio, working my heart. The next thing, Theo. Theo actually was a big part in saving my life because he was the first, I would say person. Yeah, he's the first living thing that really taught me to care about something else more than myself. Now I can say that now. I can fully say that. Yeah, and if you don't know, Theo's my dog. I have a huge, massive, block-headed golden retriever named Theo, and he saved my life because those first 90 days, I found that getting out of bed to take care of Theo was enough. I knew I had to wake up and walk this dog, feed this dog, and that was enough. Movement is medicine, and find the things that get you to move. Theo, for me, got me to get out of bed and move. It's so crazy because at this point I got sober and I still didn't really address the root of the drinking. I got back to work because I mentioned in the start of this episode, hard work in me, when I have a goal, boom, laser focus. So I just dove back into work, and to work, it was these home tours. So getting back into that, I was on the surface continuing that severing of presenting this thing and on the inside doing this inner work. And it put me in a really weird mental space. And a lot of you watching were like, oh, these episodes, like I was going through the motions straight up. And in life, sometimes there's nothing wrong with that because you have to do what's best for you. You have to show up. And in those early days, I'm not looking at, putting myself into work as a bad thing, but it was a distraction. And I still wasn't looking at the shadow. I wasn't looking at what I outlined earlier in this episode. So getting sober is one thing. Staying sober is immensely more difficult, obviously. You need to find support. And I met about, I don't know the exact date, but I think it was a little over a year into my sobriety journey. I met a guardian angel of a human named Jonathan Stein. So Jonathan was supposed to be episode number 1, and it's actually a blessing in disguise that it turned out that episode number 1 had to be me solo because I was so deathly afraid of this, which is so weird because, right, he's been on camera for like 10 years. But not on camera talking about real things. And they're meaningful things. But I met Jonathan Stein, who he is a top real estate agent, which is also ironic given that, like, okay, I'm in this real estate world. It was a blessing in disguise that he was an agent because my experiences with most agents up to that point was not very pleasant. And meeting Jonathan was like this fresh air of like, oh, wow, this is a real human. And Jonathan introduced me to my business coach. He became my mentor. We would do monthly meetups and walk here in Gramercy Park. He made me realize I wasn't alone, and he made me realize that there were successful people out there who went through the same thing I went through. And he would always talk about the things that have served him, never about the things that didn't. And I think that's a big crutch for like sobriety, is like just thinking about the bad and not like, okay, what do I get to do to better myself? Jonathan opened my world here in New York City. The lesson is you are not alone. This gets us to the role and the belief of a higher power in sobriety. So in the anonymous program that saved my life, you cannot do it unless you surrender to a higher power, whatever that may be. Whatever. That's not saying this or this or this religion. No. And I grew up Catholic. I went to a Catholic high school. And all I'll say about this is I always felt something was off. I always felt like a disconnect, and going back to words where they would say these words and do these gestures, but I never felt the intention behind the words. And from my experience in the park, I very much believe in a spiritual realm, seeing synchronicities everywhere. I can't really talk too much about this yet, but synchronicities are like seeing 333 on the clock, 222. Angel numbers are what you want to say, and people dismiss them, but they really inform you that you're on your path. For example, today is day 1444, and my life path number is number 4. I will be talking about life path number, all those things that also help my journey of sobriety, but numbers are very important. Synchronicities are seemingly divine luck, and when I got sober, I found I had more of that. I found it was more like I was going with the flow of life. I wasn't fighting against the grain. I mean, literally like not dying from drinking. That was divine luck. Meeting my wife, divine luck. My life started to blossom in a real way for the first time ever. And I didn't feel the need to validate it externally on social media. Huge, massive, massive takeaway. My wife, Geraldine, was the first person to ask me, what do you really want to do in life? And going back to why I moved to New York, it was working in production and film. And she's like, why don't you go back to an acting conservatory? You have resources now. You've got time now. You're figuring your stuff out. Go audition for a conservatory. And now this brings us to a very fun and important moment in this story of recovery, is the Terry Knickerbocker Conservatory. It says read entry from 14 months sober. Page 104. So also like a very analytical person, I literally number my journal pages. So It's interesting. My producer again, Milan, was yeah. I showed him my journals, and he's like, "Dude, it's almost like you write these as if you know someone's gonna read them one day." And that wasn't the intent, but I don't know. I wanted to have a very solid recollection of my time on Earth. January 21st, 2022, Soho, New York. This journal is a contract with myself. You will go back and read this and smile. There's no longer room for regret. You've been wanting to do this for over a decade now. Remember, everything happens for a reason, exactly as it should. I wrote that right when I went back and I went to the first day of my conservatory. So I auditioned for a few places, and then I ended on this one place, the William Esper Studio, which isn't even like an audition place because I had no experience. And I really wanted to, again, get in touch with emotions. I want to highlight each part of the story has a reason. So, committed to go to the Esper Studio. I had an interview with this guy named Terry Knickerbocker. And Terry has an innate ability to sniff the bullshit out in anyone. And he was the first person on any audition who didn't call me on something. Essentially, I told him my story about moving to New York and always loving theater and always loving production. And I made up what I realize now was an excuse. I said, well, I didn't have time or money to go train. And he says, it sounds to me like you were afraid. And here this stranger's telling me I'm afraid. And I still, my ego still hadn't died. So to have this dude, and your ego is there to protect you ultimately. That's the thing about the ego. Ego and material, they love each other, but the ego is also there to protect you. This guy just shit all over my ego. We got heated, slammed the computer. Screw this guy, I'm going to the studio. Couldn't get him out of my head. You know why? He called me out. He said, you were afraid. That's why you stopped. Not that you didn't have money or the time. And that's why when I started this today, I said I didn't memorize this because I didn't make the time. Not I didn't have the time. Yeah, Terry called me out. I called him back, and I trained with this guy, Terry Knickerbocker, for 2 years. He specifically trains theater actors. I'm talking guys like Sam Rockwell, Daniel Craig. He's worked with Austin Butler. A lot of really, really good people who do work that's just truthful. Man, this whole journal right here is the time at Terry's studio. But the takeaway from school was what I thought I'd get out of it versus the true gift of it. So again, what conservatory taught me? What did it actually teach me? Number one, the life lessons. Slow is fast enough. Simply the act of discipline, of showing up every day will bring about motivation. So the place I trained was a Meisner conservatory studio, which is essentially the fundamentals. Essentially anyone who does Meisner technique could learn how to play themselves. Basically this technique, if you look at your emotions as a color palette on a wheel, anger, sadness, grief, happiness, joy. You are finding all those in yourself and learning what they are, what they make you feel. You're learning what provokes them, how to be very self-aware of my emotions, and how that all relates to my sobriety. Also, it gave me a crash course in emotional education by legit trained professionals. And this is a big segue, but I do believe the future of America and the school systems will be integrating professionally trained emotional educators and early education. Because think about it, that's where trauma exists, by not knowing your emotions or not being attuned. So I actually, for the first time, figured out my emotional education, which sounds absurd as a grown man. And it takes a lot of humility as a grown man to say that. But that's what the world needs, I think. And that's why I'm making this podcast. School taught me about movement, about chakras, about how your body holds energies. It taught me about meditation, big one. We would literally go in every day and say, okay, 10 minutes of nothing. And we'd lay there for 10 minutes with nothing. And the first 10 minutes, I'm crawling in my skin again, like the beginning. I just have my thoughts. What about that thought? No, just push it away, push it away. What does that mean? Nothing in your mind. And then 20 minutes. And before you know it, we're meditating for 40 minutes. And the peace I get from that, I cannot go on my day if I don't meditate. Ask anyone who's close to me. I literally cannot go through my day. Essentially, school taught me how to drop social conditioning. Big one. To actually be a human again. All right. This is where it gets a bit heavy again. So again, I mentioned Terry is a truth meter. Terry noticed certain emotional tendencies I had around anger and sadness, because essentially when you're doing deep work like that, you're bringing in your own life experiences. And I have a very deep swath of them to pull from. And Terry referred me to a guy I will refer to as Harry. Harry is a Jungian analyst. I will outline in its own solo episode what a Jungian analyst is, but he blew my mind within the first sessions. And to outline the type of guy this is, he wouldn't get back to me for around 3 months, and it took my wife calling him, pleading with him to see me. Like, this guy's made it. He's in his 80s. He doesn't need new clients. And finally, after the first session, he recognized what Terry saw and was like, oh, whoa, there's a lot of things here that you got to sift through. Man, this guy's nothing short of an alchemist. It's been the most profound work I've done in my life as far as figuring out who I am. And the biggest thing is, why does that matter? You know, it's very woo-wee, oh, who am I? But it matters because you can help people. You can impact lives. And that's what this podcast is for. Oh, man. So yeah, Harry, my analyst, he's become my sage. He's become my mentor. And post-pandemic, I went back to school. I went back to this theatrical conservatory in Brooklyn. And from conservatory, I booked an off-Broadway play last May with a group of people that I was so blessed to have my first production ever be this beaming, radiant light of just joy. They were all from the Actors Studio Conservatory, which is where Al Pacino studied, James Dean, Brando, all these people who I've always looked up to for their ability to be humans and share that with us. Last but not least, but most importantly, for the first time in my life, I actually started seeking out mentors. Mentorship is so important to me because it's the first time I really felt like I had that big brother, that figure in my life to be like, okay, when my life is going to shit, who do I go to that can give me some sound advice? And that's why mentorship is important. And again, the whole point of sharing my life story is the lessons. It's not about me. I'm a conduit for the experiences. So essentially, again, Jungian analyst, it's going to be its own episode. It goes a lot on the hermetic principles, the esoteric principles of alchemy, not alchemy turning base metals into gold, but alchemy of your soul. Learning to pause. If I get triggered by something, I don't have to see red. I can let that pass. It sounds so basic and simple for someone whose brain isn't trained like that, but that has changed my life. And the main takeaways from Harry, very high principles again. The first one, I can pause, I just illustrated. The second one, not acting on impulse, but act on consciousness. And the third one, which is the heaviest one of all, and I will say this because I have to, we're souls having a human experience. My drinking myself to death illuminated that for me. My experiences in my sobriety have illuminated that, and Harry really drove that home. And with that, we're going to get into the good stuff now. Top of the line here, plant medicines, gateway tapes, and crystals. Again, this will be its own episode. Essentially, all this work with Harry, the conservatory, my sobriety led me to plant medicine and an ayahuasca ritual in Colombia. Again, its own episode, its own topic, probably many topics on this beautiful subject. But I have here on page 18 of my new journal, wow, June 30th, 2024, title, Purification. And my intention for my trip. I deeply desire confirmation, clarity, and guidance from God on my purpose in this physical life on earth. That was my intention before the trip. Page 34 in journal number 2. I don't know if you can see this. I'm just going to show you drawings from my experience because it is such a heavy thing where drawings convey it better than words. That's what I experienced on my ayahuasca trip. That's just a visual of it. And I will have a full episode, ideally with an expert on the topic. The main takeaway from ayahuasca, I mean, there was takeaways that, again, a whole episode, probably like a long one, very long. But the main takeaway was it informed my future legacy. It informed that my future legacy is service in a very real way. Going back to the NDE, I have gateway tapes written down. I will reference this slightly. Gateway tapes are a set of binaural beats that get your brain to go to higher states of consciousness. Big tool in my sobriety journey. You could zoom in on this, but essentially this was the first feeling when I did a gateway tape, if you can see that. So again, that's it. Episode 1. I want you to comment down below, who do you want to see on this show? What legacies today do you believe are the most impactful? Who right now is building the strongest legacy for the betterment of the world? That's the next point. The next goal of this podcast is, this is a big one, to raise the collective consciousness of the world by sharing and breaking down ancient knowledge into modern terms through this podcast. That's a big one, and that's a very out there one. But that is a goal as I work on ascending my own consciousness. Sobriety for a lot of people triggers a spiritual awakening, and that's what mine was. Like, I can't even beat around the bush. That's just what it was. And the last goal is an open dialogue and building up this community. So again, just to round up those main takeaways from this first episode of Building Legacy, how I got sober, the actionable things that you can take away. Number one, build strong habits. Lean on your friends. Work on things like breath work. I mean, breath work, again, I can't emphasize that one enough. Fitness, not for looking good, but for feeling good. Cold water to regulate your body. Sauna, again, the opposite of the cold is sauna. Sauna is a big one. Going into nature, having a pet. Journaling, like we started. In my opinion, the cornerstone of legacy is journaling and being accountable and looking back and having the perspective of, oh, this was happening on this day last year. I wonder what happened where I wrote, let people see your soul. Now I can ponder on that for the rest of the day, and that's fun. Number two, learn to love yourself. Very simple, especially for a man to say that. Very powerful. Don't let anyone tell you otherwise. Powerful. Number three, decide who you want to be and put in the work to become your highest self. Lean into your higher self. They are in there somewhere buried beneath a lot of things, but you can find that person. Number four, find the root of your undesirable behaviors through the inner work and discover who you really are and own it. This podcast is me owning that. I've wanted to do a podcast for so long. This is owning that. Number five, this was number one in the episode, but honor your ancestors. Look into your legacy. Really ask questions. Where did I come from? Who were these people? What struggles? Because for me specifically, drinking, knowing now where I come from and what struggles my relatives went through, it makes me just, it keeps me sober right now. It keeps me sober. If I have a horrible day, it keeps me, oh, they went through that. My grandmother was in a concentration camp. My grandfather, there's a story, I know we're ending it here, but my grandfather, when he was 15, he was in the woods and he stepped on a mine and he didn't talk for 2 years after that. And as you can imagine, he was also an alcoholic. So again, these are heavy topics. The sixth takeaway, just like sobriety, building legacy is truly made in the present moment. Little things, opening doors, picking up trash, they sound very small, but they build up. You stack the evidence when you actually become a good person. And that's, again, I'm not saying I'm a good person. I have a lot to work on, but it's just being aware of going towards that direction. A hero and a villain, the origin story, always the same. One says, hey, I'm going to make sure that never happens to anyone again. The other says, that hurt me so fucking bad. I'm going to make sure everyone feels how bad I feel. So move in that right direction. And with that, that's the first episode of Building Legacy. Again, comment down below who you want on this show. I hope you enjoyed this, and more importantly than enjoying it, I hope you got something from it. So I hope you're well watching this, and with that, I'll see you in the next episode of Building Legacy. Feels very weird to say, but we're doing it! We're done!